The moving trucks arrived at 9:00 the next morning. By 9:15, my husband was standing barefoot in the driveway, wearing yesterday's wrinkled dress shirt, staring at the sold sign planted in front of the house we had lived in for 23 years. Ryan kept asking the realtor if this was some kind of mistake. Vanessa was screaming into her phone at someone from the title company and sitting quietly on the kitchen counter, right beside the untouched container of leftovers they had told me to eat the night before, was the letter I had left behind. I wasn't there to watch any of it. By then, I was already 6 hours away, driving north through the mountains with the windows cracked open and the cold October air filling my lungs for the first time in years. The strange thing was, I didn't feel guilty. I felt calm. The night before had started like every other family celebration in our house, with me in the kitchen, while everyone else prepared to be seen. The smell of garlic butter and rosemary still lingered in the air as I wiped down the counters for the second time. A pan of roasted potatoes sat cooling near the stove while the dishwasher hummed softly behind me. Upstairs, I could hear Vanessa moving quickly from room to room in heels that clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. Ryan's voice drifted down the hallway while he argued with someone from work through his AirPods, and somewhere in the middle of all that noise, my husband walked through the front door grinning like a man 20 years younger. "Claire," Stephen called out before I even saw him. "Where are you?" "In the kitchen," I called back. He appeared moments later, loosening his tie with one hand while carrying a bottle of champagne in the other. His face was flushed with excitement. For a second, seeing him that happy warmed something inside me the way it used to. "They finally did it," he said. "Executive Vice President." I blinked at him. "You got it." "I got it," he laughed and shook his head. "God, it still doesn't feel real." I smiled immediately, genuinely proud, despite everything that had changed between us over the years. "Stephen, that's wonderful." He leaned down and kissed my cheek quickly before walking toward the refrigerator. I knew tonight would happen eventually. Vanessa suddenly appeared in the doorway wearing a fitted cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my old monthly teacher salary. "Ryan already booked the private room downtown," she said brightly. "Everybody's meeting us there at 7:30. "Everybody?" I asked automatically. There was a tiny pause. Not long, just enough. Vanessa glanced towards Stephen before smoothing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Mostly the people from Stephen's company, my parents, Ryan's mentor from the office, that sort of thing." Stephen pulled out a sparkling water and nodded distractedly. "A lot of networking tonight." I waited for him to say times, "Of course you're coming." For him to notice I was still standing there holding the dish towel in my hands. Instead, he opened the fridge and frowned slightly. "Didn't we still have that pot roast from yesterday? It's in the glass container." "Perfect." He shut the refrigerator door. "You can finish that tonight. No point wasting food." I stared at him, not because the comment was cruel exactly. Stephen had never been openly cruel. That would have been easier to fight against. No. What hurt was how natural it sounded to him, as if it made complete sense that his wife of 23 years would stay home alone eating leftovers, while the rest of the family celebrated the biggest promotion of his life. Vanessa smiled softly, the way people do when they're trying to smooth over something uncomfortable without actually fixing it. "Honestly, Claire, you'd probably hate this dinner anyway. It's all corporate talk." Ryan finally came downstairs, adjusting his watch. "Dad, Mark said the regional guys are already there." Then he looked at me quickly. "Mom, can you make sure nobody forgets to feed Baxter later?" Not one person asked if I wanted to come. I looked at Stephen one more time, giving him one final opportunity to see me. He didn't. He was too busy texting someone from work, so I smiled. "Okay," I said quietly. That was it. One word. Vanessa grabbed her purse. Ryan opened the garage door. Stephen walked over and kissed my forehead absent-mindedly like I was part of the furniture. "We probably won't be home until late," he said. "Don't wait up." A few minutes later, the house fell silent. I stood in the kitchen, listening to the distant sound of their car pulling away from the driveway. The dishwasher continued humming softly behind me. Somewhere upstairs, the television in Ryan and Vanessa's room was still playing because they'd forgotten to turn it off. I walked slowly toward the refrigerator and opened it. There, on the middle shelf, sat the container of pot roast. A yellow sticky note had been attached to the lid in Vanessa's neat handwriting, "Times Claire." For some reason, that tiny heart nearly broke me. I closed the refrigerator door carefully and leaned both hands against the counter. The truth was, a dinner you're excluded from here, a conversation that happens without you, they're a decision made for you instead of with you. Over the last 2 years, I had become useful instead of loved, reliable instead of cherished. Stephen used to ask how my day was the second he walked through the door. Now he mostly asked where things were, his dry cleaning, his charger, the Navy folder from his office. Ryan and Vanessa had moved into our home 11 months earlier temporarily while saving for a house. At first I'd been happy about it. I missed having a full house after Sophie left for college in Seattle, but gradually the entire rhythm of the home changed. Vanessa reorganized the kitchen within 3 weeks. Then came new schedules, new furniture, new systems for how the house should run. Without anyone ever saying it directly, I somehow became the unpaid staff member keeping everybody comfortable. And the worst part, I had let it happen. I stayed quiet because peace seemed easier than conflict. Until that night. Until the leftovers. I walked upstairs slowly and entered the bedroom Stephen and I had shared for over 2 decades. His side of the bed was unmade from that morning. A gray suit jacket lay draped across the chair near the window. For a long moment I just stood there looking around the room. Then I opened the closet. In the back corner beneath an old storage shelf sat 2 navy blue suitcases we hadn't used in years. I pulled them out carefully and placed them on the bed, and for the first time in a very long time I stopped thinking about what was best for everyone else. I didn't pack everything. That was the first thing I realized as I folded sweaters into the larger suitcase beneath the soft yellow light of our bedroom lamp. I wasn't trying to erase my life. I was trying to save whatever parts of it still belonged to me. Outside the bedroom window, the neighborhood looked peaceful. Porch lights glowed warmly across the street. Somewhere nearby, someone's sprinkler clicked rhythmically against dry autumn grass. It felt strange knowing the world continued normally, while something inside me had shifted so completely. I moved quietly through the room, pulling clothes from drawers with calm, deliberate motions, jeans, warm sweaters, my mother's silver jewelry box from the top shelf of the closet, the framed photograph of Sophie and me Seattle waterfront last spring. I left most of the expensive things behind the television. Stephen insisted on buying last Christmas the designer bedroom set Vanessa had talked him into replacing 2 years ago. Even my wedding album stayed inside the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Some memories felt too heavy to carry. Downstairs, the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 times. They were probably ordering appetizers by now. I could picture the evening perfectly without being there. Stephen, sitting near the center of the long restaurant table, loosened Thai bourbon in hand, smiling, while people congratulated him. Ryan talking loudly about real estate investments. Vanessa charming everyone effortlessly while pretending to be interested in stories she'd already heard twice. And somewhere during the evening, someone might ask, "Where's your wife tonight?" Maybe Stephen would laugh awkwardly and say, "Oh, Claire hates these work dinners." Or maybe Vanessa would smoothly answer for him. She wanted a quiet night at home. That was the thing about disappearing slowly inside a family. Eventually other people started telling your story for you. I zipped the first suitcase shut and sat briefly on the edge of the bed. 23 years. That was how long I had been married to Stephen Bennett. When we first met, he used to drive 40 minutes after work just to eat cheap Mexican food with me at a tiny restaurant near the elementary school where I taught 3rd grade. Back then, he listened carefully whenever I talked. He remembered small things. He used to bring me daffodils because once, very casually, I had mentioned they were my favorite flower. We built our life together from almost nothing. Our first apartment had stained carpets and a heater that barely worked during Ohio winters. We used lawn chairs as dining room furniture for nearly 6 months because we couldn't afford anything else. On weekends, we would sit on the floor eating takeout Chinese food while making plans for our future. Back then, Stephen used to say things like, "One day, sweetheart, we're going to have a house full of people who love being together." For a long time we did. Ryan was born when I was 21. Sophie came 4 years later. Life became loud and messy and exhausting in the ordinary beautiful ways. Families often are soccer practices, school lunches, science fairs, late-night fevers, Christmas mornings with wrapping paper covering the living room floor. Stephen worked constantly during those years, and I supported him constantly. I handled nearly everything at home so he could focus on growing his career. At first, it felt like teamwork. We were building something together. But somewhere along the way, our roles hardened into something permanent. Stephen became the important one. I became the dependable one. There's a difference. By 1000, both suitcases were packed and lined neatly beside the bedroom door. I walked downstairs carrying a small stack of folders from the fireproof lockbox in my closet: passport, bank records, insurance papers, the deed paperwork Margaret had helped me organize weeks earlier. Margaret Ellis had been the first person in years who looked directly at me and asked, "What do you want, Claire?" Not what did my husband want. Not what did my children need. Not what would keep the peace. Me. I met her 6 months earlier through a women's financial workshop at the library. She was 57, widowed, sharply intelligent, and completely unimpressed by excuses. The first time we had coffee together, I told her I sometimes felt invisible inside my own home. Margaret stirred cream into her coffee slowly, before saying, Women disappear in pieces usually while everyone praises them for being so selfless. That sentence stayed with me for weeks. At first I defended my family. Stephen was stressed. Ryan was adjusting to married life. Vanessa meant well. But once I started paying attention, honestly, I couldn't unsee it anymore. The interruptions whenever I spoke, the way decisions happened around me instead of with me, the casual expectation that I would cook, clean, organize, remember birthdays, solve problems, and absorb tension quietly. Nobody asked if I was tired. They just assumed I would continue. 3 months ago, after another dinner where I cleaned dishes alone while everyone else laughed in the living room, I finally contacted a lawyer Margaret recommended. Not because I wanted revenge, because I needed options. The attorney had reviewed everything carefully: the house, my inheritance from my mother, our shared accounts, the investment property Stephen barely remembered we owned. "You're not trapped," she told me gently. I cried in my car afterward. Not because I was sad, but because I realized I had spent years believing I had nowhere else to go. Around 1130, my phone buzzed with a text message from Sophie times Dad posted about the promotion, lol. "Fancy dinner?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying times "looks beautiful." 3 dots appeared almost immediately times. "Wait, you didn't go?" I hesitated, then typed times. "No, sweetheart, I stayed home tonight." Several seconds passed before her answer arrived times. That's weird. Such a small response, but somehow those 2 words made tears sting my eyes for the first time all evening because Sophie noticed. Before I could respond again, another message appeared. Times, "Mom, are you okay?" I looked around the quiet kitchen, the packed suitcases upstairs, the leftovers untouched in the fridge, the silence pressing gently against the walls. Then I typed the most honest thing I had said in years times: "I think I'm finally going to be." I left the house at 2:17 inches the morning. Not because I was trying to be dramatic, not because I wanted to disappear under cover of darkness like someone fleeing a crime scene. It was simply the hour when the neighborhood was quiet enough that nobody would notice an SUV slowly backing out of the driveway. The kitchen light was still on when I carried my final suitcase downstairs. For a moment, I stood there looking around the room that had once been the center of my entire life. Birthday cakes had cooled on those counters. Sophie learned fractions sitting at that kitchen table while I cut apples into tiny slices beside her. Ryan had once slept curled against my shoulder on the living room couch after a thunderstorm terrified him at age 7. So much of my life had happened inside those walls, and somehow over the years I had stopped existing inside it. The letter sat neatly beneath the ceramic cookie jar. Stephen bought me on our 15th anniversary during a trip to Charleston. Back then he still paid attention to little things. He noticed when I lingered too long near shop windows. I touched the lid of the jar gently before stepping away, then I grabbed my keys and walked out the front door without looking back. The cold October air hit my face immediately. Dry leaves skittered across the driveway in the wind while distant traffic hummed softly somewhere beyond the neighborhood. My breath fogged faintly as I loaded the final suitcase into the back of the SUV. For one brief second, fear flickered through me. What am I doing, Times? The question came suddenly and hard. I was 45 years old. I had spent more than half my life married to Stephen Bennett. I had never lived alone as an adult. I had never made a major decision without first considering everyone else's needs. Now I was driving away from my entire life before sunrise, carrying 2 suitcases and a future I couldn't fully picture yet. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. Then I remembered the leftovers. The yellow sticky note. Claire. Something inside me steadied again. I started the engine. By dawn, Ohio had disappeared behind me. The further north I drove, the lighter my chest felt. Trees blazed orange and red along the highway. Small towns drifted past the windows, wrapped in quiet morning fog. I stopped once near Erie for coffee and gas, standing alone beside the pump, while the cold wind whipped strands of hair across my face. And for the first time in years, nobody needed anything from me. No dinner plans, no grocery lists, no forgotten dry cleaning, no emotional management. Just silence. I didn't realize how exhausted I had been until that silence arrived. Around 8:30, my phone began vibrating nonstop inside my purse. Stephen again. Then Ryan. Then Stephen again. I didn't answer. At a rest stop outside Buffalo, I finally turned the phone completely off before climbing back into the driver's seat. Margaret had warned me this moment would come. The second people lose access to the version of you that serves them, she told me once they panic. At the time I thought she sounded cynical. Now I understood she was simply experienced. I crossed into Vermont shortly after noon. The mountains rolled gently beneath low gray clouds, while small white churches and roadside farm stands appeared along winding roads lined with maple trees. The air smelled different there, cleaner, somehow touched faintly by wood smoke and damp earth. By the time I reached the little lakeside town of Maple Glen, my shoulders had relaxed so much they actually hurt. The cottage sat near the edge of a quiet road overlooking Lake Champlain. Small, white, simple, exactly what I needed. When I stepped out of the SUV, the sound that greeted me first was water moving softly against rocks. Not traffic, not televisions, not people talking over each other. Just water. An older woman wrapped in a navy cardigan stepped onto the neighboring porch holding 2 mugs. "You must be Claire," she called warmly. I smiled tiredly. "I am. I'm Helen Morris. I live next door." She lifted 1 mug slightly. Coffee seemed more useful than introductions. I laughed softly for the first time in days. Helen walked over carefully and handed me the mug. "Long drive." "You could say that." She studied my face only briefly before nodding toward the cottage. "Well, whatever brought you here, this town has a habit of helping people breathe again." The words nearly undid me. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were kind. Inside, the cottage smelled faintly of cedar and old books. Afternoon light spilled across polished wood floors while the lake shimmered softly through the kitchen windows. It wasn't luxurious. The countertops were outdated and the furniture mismatched, but every inch of it felt peaceful. Mine. I unpacked slowly over the next few hours. Sweaters folded neatly into drawers, books stacked beside the fireplace, framed photographs placed carefully on shelves. I hung only one family picture, the one of Sophie and me in Seattle. As evening settled outside the windows, I finally turned my phone back on. The screen exploded instantly, 31 missed calls, 12 voicemails, more text messages than I could count. I sat quietly at the small kitchen table staring at them. Then I opened the first voicemail. "Claire, where the hell are you?" Stephen's voice sounded sharp and breathless. "There are movers here saying the house closes tomorrow morning. Call me immediately." The second message came an hour later. "Claire, this isn't funny anymore." By the 4th voicemail, anger had disappeared completely. "Please just answer the phone." Ryan sounded shaken in his messages too. "Mom, Dad said you left some kind of letter. Vanessa's freaking out. Nobody understands what's happening." But the message that stayed with me came from Sophie. "Mom," she said softly, "I think you finally did something for yourself, and honestly I'm proud of you." I closed my eyes. Outside wind rustled through the trees near the lake. For years I thought strength meant enduring, quietly holding families together, absorbing disappointment gracefully, making yourself smaller so everyone else could stay comfortable. But sitting there alone in that tiny cottage kitchen, I began to understand something differently. Maybe real strength was finally refusing to disappear. As darkness settled over the lake, I walked out onto the porch carrying a blanket around my shoulders. The water reflected faint silver moonlight while distant lights flickered quietly across the shoreline. Back in Ohio, my family was probably still scrambling through chaos. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one fixing it. And strangely enough, the world kept turning anyway. Stephen called 83 times before the house officially stopped belonging to us. Not our family, not our future us. That distinction mattered now. At 9:00 the next morning, while I stood in thick wool socks making coffee in my tiny Vermont kitchen, Stephen Bennett sat at the dining room table in Ohio, surrounded by legal documents he had apparently never bothered reading carefully before. At least that's how his attorney later described it to me. I imagined the scene often afterward, Stephen rubbing both hands over his face while Ryan paced nearby in disbelief. Vanessa probably speaking too quickly, her voice sharpening every time another problem surfaced. The house sale had been finalized weeks earlier. Every signature legal, every document valid, every account carefully separated. I hadn't acted impulsively. That shocked them most of all. For years they had mistaken my silence for helplessness. By noon I finally listened to Stephen's newest voicemail. "Claire," he said hoarsely, "please stop doing this. If you're angry, fine, we'll talk when you come home. But selling the house, Jesus Christ, Claire." I sat quietly by the window while he kept talking. "I know things haven't been perfect lately, but this," he exhaled sharply. "Ryan and Vanessa have nowhere to go right now. The movers are literally here carrying furniture outside." For a brief second, guilt pressed against my ribs. Then another memory surfaced immediately, me standing alone in the kitchen while they all left for dinner without me. Not because they forgot, but because nobody considered me important enough to include. The guilt faded. I deleted the voicemail. Outside, rain drifted softly across the lake in silver streaks. Helen's porch light glowed through the mist next door, while somewhere farther down the road, a dog barked twice before falling quiet again. The peacefulness still felt unfamiliar. I spent that afternoon unpacking books into the built-in shelves beside the fireplace. Small, ordinary tasks grounded me, folding towels, arranging dishes, opening windows briefly to let cold air inside. No one interrupted me. No one needed dinner. No one asked where something was. I didn't realize how much mental space my family occupied until it suddenly became empty. Around 3:00, my phone buzzed with Sophie's name. I answered immediately. Hey, sweetheart. There was a pause before she spoke. Dad's losing his mind. I leaned against the kitchen counter quietly. I figured they genuinely didn't see this coming. A humorless smile touched my mouth. That's part of the problem. Sophie sighed softly. In the background I could hear city traffic from Seattle and the faint clatter of dishes. Ryan keeps saying you overreacted. That hurt more than I expected. Not because Ryan was cruel, but because he truly believed it. Children raised inside certain family dynamics often stop noticing the person carrying the emotional weight of everyone else. To them, the support simply feels automatic, like electricity or running water. Only when it disappears do they realize how much depended on it. What do you think? I asked carefully. Sophie was quiet for several seconds, then she said, I think you stayed too long. My throat tightened unexpectedly. For years I had protected my children from the uncomfortable truths inside my marriage. I thought that was what good mothers did. But children notice more than we think. I'm not trying to destroy the family, I said quietly. I know. Sophie's voice softened. Honestly, Mom, I think you're trying to save yourself. After we hung up, I stood by the window for a long time watching rain move across the lake. Save yourself. The phrase sounded dramatic, almost selfish, yet deep down I knew she was right. Back in Ohio, chaos spread quickly once practical reality settled in. The buyers wanted possession immediately. The movers had strict schedules. Ryan and Vanessa suddenly needed temporary housing, and for the first time in years, Stephen had to solve problems without quietly handing them to me. That night he called again. This time I answered. The silence between us lasted nearly 10 seconds. Finally he spoke. Where are you? Vermont. Another silence. You actually left. I did. His breathing sounded uneven. Claire, what is this? I looked out toward the dark lake. You already know. No, I don't. Frustration crept into his voice. People don't just walk away from 23 years because of one dinner. It wasn't one dinner, I said, my voice remaining steady. It was years of becoming invisible in my own life. That's ridiculous. Is it? I continued calmly. Tell me honestly, Stephen, when was the last time you asked me if I was happy? He opened his mouth, then stopped. I could hear him trying to think. That hurt him more than anything I could have said. Claire, his tone softened slightly. I know we've been distracted lately. Ryan moving in work pressure, everything with the promotion. You keep saying lately. I closed my eyes briefly. Stephen, I've been lonely inside our marriage for years. The words landed heavily between us, not dramatic, not screamed, just true. On the other end of the line, I heard him sit down heavily somewhere. I didn't know it was that bad. A bitter laugh almost escaped me, but I swallowed it. Of course he didn't know. He benefited from my silence. People rarely examine systems that keep them comfortable. I'm not calling to fight, I said gently. I'm just done pretending everything was fine. His voice lowered. Are you coming back? I stared at my reflection in the dark window above the sink. The old Claire would have hesitated, would have softened immediately, would have rushed to reassure him, but something fundamental inside me had shifted the moment I drove away from that house. No, I said quietly. The silence afterward felt enormous. Finally, Stephen whispered, I don't even recognize you right now. For the first time in years, that didn't hurt my feelings because maybe the problem was that he never truly saw me clearly to begin with. After we hung up, I wrapped myself in a blanket and stepped outside onto the porch. Cold air brushed against my face while rain tapped softly against the wooden railing. Across the lake, tiny lights glowed warmly through the darkness. For years, I thought leaving would feel explosive, messy, cruel. Instead, it felt strangely quiet, like setting down something unbearably heavy after carrying it for far too long. The first morning I woke up in Vermont, I didn't recognize the sound of silence. Not true silence. Nothing in nature is ever completely quiet. There was wind moving through the trees outside the cottage, water shifting gently against the shore, and somewhere in the distance, the low hum of a truck driving along the main road through town. But there were no slammed cabinet doors, no television blaring from Ryan and Vanessa's bedroom upstairs. No. Stephen pacing through the kitchen already talking about work before sunrise. No pressure sitting in my chest the moment my eyes opened. I lay still beneath the heavy quilt staring at the pale morning light stretching across the ceiling. For the first time in years I had nowhere to rush, and strangely that felt almost uncomfortable. I made coffee slowly that morning, standing barefoot in the small kitchen, while mist drifted over the lake outside the windows. The cottage smelled faintly of cedar and cinnamon from the candle Helen left on the counter as a welcome gift. I carried my mug onto the porch wrapped in a cardigan, and watched the town wake up gradually. An older man walked his golden retriever down the road. A teenage girl rode past on a bicycle with a violin case strapped to her back. Across the water, thin smoke curled from someone's chimney into the cold gray sky. Nobody here knew me as Stephen's wife, Ryan's mother, the reliable woman who handled everything. Here I was simply Claire. The thought felt both freeing and terrifying. Around noon, Helen knocked gently on my front door, carrying a basket covered with a dish towel. "I made chicken soup," she announced before I could speak. "And before you try refusing, let me save you the effort. I'm widowed, retired, and deeply stubborn." I laughed softly and stepped aside to let her in. Helen moved through the cottage with the comfortable confidence of someone who had learned long ago how to survive loneliness without becoming bitter. Her silver hair was pinned loosely at the back of her neck, and she wore worn hiking boots beneath dark jeans and a thick sweater. "You sleep at all?" she asked while setting bowls on the counter. "Actually, yes." "Good," she nodded approvingly. "That means your nervous system finally realized nobody's demanding anything from it." I blinked at her. She smiled slightly. Women our age carry stress in their bodies for so long they forget what calm feels like. The soup smelled incredible, warm broth, thyme, garlic, carrots softened perfectly. We sat together at the small kitchen table while rain tapped gently against the windows. Helen never pushed for details. That alone made me trust her. After a while, she simply asked, "Do you miss them?" I stared down into my soup. "Yes," I admitted quietly. "But I think I miss the idea of them more than the reality." Helen nodded slowly, like she understood exactly what I meant. "Sometimes people mourn relationships years before they actually leave them," she said. That sentence settled heavily inside me because she was right. I had been grieving my marriage long before I packed those suitcases. Back in Ohio, reality was settling over my family in uglier ways. Ryan called 3 times that afternoon before I finally answered. "Mom, this is insane," he said immediately. "No, hello, no, how are you? Just frustration?" I closed my eyes briefly. "Hi, Ryan." He exhaled sharply like he was trying to stay calm. "Do you know Vanessa and I are living in a hotel right now? You have money for an apartment." That's not the point. I looked out toward the lake while he continued talking rapidly about storage units, paperwork, work stress, and how furious Vanessa was. The entire conversation circled one central idea: how difficult my leaving had made things for everyone else. Not once did he ask why I left. Finally, I interrupted quietly. "Ryan, did you ever notice I was unhappy?" Silence. "Then, Mom, everybody gets stressed sometimes." There it was, again minimizing. Not cruelly, not intentionally, just automatically. I pressed my fingers against my forehead. "Do you remember your father's promotion dinner? You all left me home alone." "That's not," he stopped himself. "Mom, Vanessa thought it was more of a corporate thing." "And what did you think?" Another silence, longer this time. "I guess?" His voice softened slightly. "I guess I didn't really think about it." Exactly. That was the entire problem. Nobody thought about me anymore unless something needed to be done. When we hung up, I sat motionless at the kitchen table for several minutes afterward. That conversation hurt more than Steven's anger because Ryan genuinely loved me, and even he had stopped seeing me clearly. Later that evening, Sophie called while walking home from class in Seattle. "You sound tired," she said immediately. "I am tired. You know you don't have to defend yourself to everybody, right?" A small smile touched my mouth. "You always were the observant one." I had practiced. Her tone softened. "Mom, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" She hesitated. "Sometimes when I came home from college it felt like you disappeared every time Vanessa entered a room." The comment landed hard because it was true. Sophie continued carefully. "You became quieter. Smaller somehow." I swallowed against sudden emotion. I didn't realize anyone noticed. I noticed everything. After we hung up, I stood outside on the porch long after dark, wrapped in a blanket while cold wind moved across the lake. Smaller. That was exactly what had happened to me. Little by little, year after year, I had reduced myself to keep everyone else comfortable. Not because anyone directly asked me to, because somewhere along the way I started believing my value depended on how useful I could be. The realization felt painful but also freeing. Inside the cottage, my phone buzzed again. Steven this time. Instead of anxiety, I felt something quieter: distance. I let it ring until the screen went dark, then I went inside, locked the door, and made myself a cup of tea in a kitchen where nobody expected anything from me at all. 3 days after my conversation with Ryan, Vanessa found me. I had just come back from the small grocery store in town carrying a paper bag of apples, bread, and a bunch of yellow daffodils I had bought on impulse from a bucket near the register. They were out of season and slightly overpriced, but I bought them anyway. For 23 years I had waited for someone else to remember they were my favorite. Now I remembered for myself. Her car was parked in front of the cottage when I turned onto the lane. A white SUV, too polished for the muddy road, with Ohio plates and a small scratch near the rear bumper. Vanessa stood beside it wearing a camel coat, dark sunglasses, and the kind of expression people wear when they have already decided they are the reasonable one in the conversation. I pulled into the driveway slowly and turned off the engine. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then Vanessa removed her sunglasses and walked toward me with a careful smile. "Claire," she said, as though we were meeting outside church after a misunderstanding. "Thank God. We were all so worried." I stepped out of the car and closed the door. "How did you get my address?" She blinked once. "Ryan found it through some paperwork." "That wasn't his to look through." "We're family," she said quickly. "This isn't some stranger showing up." I looked at her then, really looked. She was only 24 younger than I had allowed myself to remember. Sometimes beneath the perfect makeup and polished manners, there was exhaustion around her eyes, a little fear too. For the first time I understood that Vanessa hadn't only taken control of my home because she was selfish, she had done it because control made her feel safe. That did not excuse what she had done, but it made her human. Still, understanding someone did not mean handing them the keys to your peace. I lifted the grocery bag from the passenger seat. "If you came all this way, you can say what you need to say on the porch." She followed me up the steps. Her eyes moved over the cottage quickly, the peeling paint near the railing, the simple wicker chairs, the small view of the lake beyond the trees. "You're really staying here?" she asked. "Yes. It's so small. It's enough." Her mouth tightened. I set the groceries inside the door, then returned to the porch without inviting her in. That boundary felt small, almost invisible, but to me it was enormous. Vanessa stood with her arms folded against the cold. "Stephen is falling apart. Ryan can barely focus at work. We're in a short-term rental that costs twice what we budgeted. Everyone is hurting, Claire." I sat down in one of the wicker chairs. "I'm sorry they're hurting." Her expression sharpened. "But not sorry enough to come back." My silence seemed to frustrate her more because I didn't decorate it with guilt. She exhaled and glanced away toward the water. "You know, I always respected you. I really did. I thought you were strong, capable, the kind of woman who could keep a family together. That's why this doesn't make sense to me. There's a difference between keeping a family together and letting a family consume you." Vanessa looked back at me. "Nobody consumed you." I smiled faintly, not with humor. "Who planned dinners?" She looked confused. "What? Who cooked them? Who cleaned afterward? Who remembered your mother's birthday last spring when even Ryan forgot? Who watched Baxter whenever everyone went away for the weekend? Who picked up your dry cleaning when your car was in the shop? Who bought the groceries, scheduled the repairs, mailed the gifts, kept the house running?" Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. I nodded once. "That's what I mean." Her voice dropped. "You could have said something." "I did. Many times. I just didn't say it in a way that inconvenienced anyone enough to be heard." For a moment the only sound was the wind moving through the dry leaves near the porch steps. Then her face hardened again because humility is difficult when someone has traveled 6 hours expecting to win. "You abandoned us," she said. "No," I replied. "I resigned from a position nobody admitted I was holding." That landed. I saw it in her eyes. Before she could respond, another car turned onto the lane, Stephen's black sedan. Vanessa stiffened immediately. "I didn't know he was coming today." I believed her. Stephen parked behind her SUV and sat in the driver's seat for several seconds before getting out. He looked older than he had the night of the promotion dinner. His dress shirt was wrinkled beneath a gray coat, and there was a tiredness in his posture that success had never prepared him to carry. When he saw Vanessa, he stopped. "What are you doing here?" "She's worried about her life," I said calmly. "Same as everyone else." Vanessa flushed. "That's not fair." "Maybe not entirely," I said, "but it's true enough." Stephen rubbed a hand across his face. "Vanessa, go home." She looked between us. "Ryan asked me to." "Go home," he repeated, quieter this time. For once she didn't argue. She walked down the porch steps stiffly, got into her SUV and drove away without looking back. Stephen remained at the foot of the steps. I did not invite him up immediately. That pause mattered. Finally he said, "May I sit?" I nodded toward the other chair. He climbed the steps slowly and sat beside me. For several minutes we looked out at the lake in silence. A flock of geese moved across the gray water in a loose, uneven line. "I read your letter again," he said. "I kept my eyes on the lake, and I hated it the first time. Because," he swallowed it, "made me feel accused." "You were accused." "I know." His hands folded together between his knees. "That's what I'm trying to say. I know that now." The wind lifted a strand of hair across my cheek. I tucked it behind my ear, waiting. Stephen's voice was low when he continued. "I keep thinking about that dinner. I keep trying to remember why I didn't ask you to come." I looked at him then. He stared down at his hands, And the worst part is, I don't have a real answer. I just assumed you'd be there when we got back. There it was, the honest center of everything. Not hatred, not malice assumption. I had become part of the background of his life as permanent and unexamined as the walls of our old house. I built a life where you could assume that I said quietly, "So I have my share of responsibility too." He shook his head. "Don't make this easier for me." "I'm not. I'm telling the truth." His eyes were wet when he finally looked at me. "Is there any way back?" I breathed in slowly. Cold air filled my lungs. "There may be a way forward someday," I said, "but not back. I won't return to a life where I have to disappear so everyone else can feel comfortable." Stephen nodded once, though the movement seemed to cost him something. We sat there until the sky darkened and the porch light came on automatically beside the door. When he finally stood to leave, he did not try to hug me. That restraint was the first respectful thing he had done in a long time. Winter arrived slowly in Maple Glen. By late November, the lake had turned steel gray beneath low clouds and thin layers of frost coated the porch railings each morning. The tourists disappeared after the autumn colors faded, leaving behind quiet roads, smoke curling from chimneys, and the kind of peaceful stillness that once would have made me feel lonely. Now it felt like healing. I developed routines without even realizing it. Coffee at sunrise beside the kitchen window, long walks along the shoreline wrapped in scarves and thick boots. Tuesday afternoons helping organize books at the community library dinner whenever I felt hungry instead of whenever everyone else expected it. For years, my entire life had revolved around anticipating other people's needs before they voiced them. Here, days unfolded differently, simpler, slower, and gradually. I began noticing pieces of myself returning. I started writing again. Not anything important at first, just small observations in a leather notebook Helen gave me. One rainy afternoon, the sound of geese crossing the lake before snow, the smell of old paper inside the library, the strange freedom of buying groceries for one person. Then, one evening, while snow drifted softly outside the windows, I found myself writing about my marriage. Not the dramatic moments, not the ending, the ordinary loneliness. How Stephen used to walk into rooms already speaking before he looked at me. How I learned to keep conversations short because everyone else seemed busier. How entire days passed where the only touch I received was someone handing me a dirty plate. The details felt painfully small written down, yet together they had nearly erased me. A week before Christmas, Sophie arrived unexpectedly. I heard tires crunching through fresh snow outside and looked up from the kitchen table just as she climbed out of a rental car, wrapped in a dark green coat and a knitted scarf. The second I opened the front door, she burst into tears. "Oh, honey," I whispered, pulling her into my arms. "I missed you," she cried against my shoulder. I held her tightly while snowflakes melted in her dark hair. She still smelled faintly like vanilla shampoo and cold winter air, the same way she had when she was 16. Inside, we made hot chocolate and sat curled beneath blankets near the fireplace while evenings settled around the cottage. "You look different," she said eventually. I smiled faintly. "Older?" "No," she studied me carefully. "Lighter." The word settled warmly inside me. Over the next 2 days, Sophie filled the cottage with easy laughter I hadn't realized how desperately I missed. We baked cinnamon bread, watched old movies, and walked through town while snow fell softly around us. For the first time in years, spending time with family didn't feel like work. One night while we washed dishes together after dinner, Sophie asked quietly, "Do you still love Dad?" I dried my hands slowly before answering. "Yes," I admitted, but not in the same way anymore. She nodded like she already understood. "That's okay," she said softly. "Sometimes love changes after people hurt each other too long." The maturity in her voice startled me briefly. Then again, children raised inside emotionally complicated homes often grow up faster than they should. On Christmas Eve, Stephen called. I almost didn't answer, but something in me no longer feared hearing his voice. "Merry Christmas," he said quietly. "Merry Christmas." There was soft background noise behind him, dishes clinking, a television murmuring somewhere far away. "You sound peaceful," he said after a moment. I looked across the room where Sophie sat, reading beside the fire with one of Helen's cats asleep in her lap. "I think I am." He exhaled softly. "The house feels strange without you." I didn't answer immediately. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I no longer felt responsible for comforting every uncomfortable truth. "Finally," I said, "it probably always did. You just notice it now." Silence stretched gently between us, then Stephen surprised me. "I started therapy." I blinked. "You did?" "Yes." A humorless laugh escaped him. "Apparently emotionally neglecting your wife for years is something professionals have opinions about." Despite myself, I smiled faintly. "It's not funny," he added quietly. "No, I agreed it isn't." Another pause then. He said the words, I had waited years to hear, though they arrived too late to change everything. I'm sorry I stopped seeing you. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Not because I needed the apology anymore, but because part of me had once needed it desperately. I know, I said softly. After we hung up, I stood by the window watching snow fall across the lake while Christmas lights glowed warmly from neighboring cottages. A year earlier, I would have spent that evening exhausted from cooking for everyone else while silently managing family tensions around a crowded dinner table. Now the cottage smelled like cinnamon and pine. Sophie laughed softly in the next room. The fire crackled gently. Snow covered the world outside in quiet, white stillness. And for the first time in a very long time, I understood something clearly. Peace is not the absence of love. It is the absence of disappearing. By early spring, the divorce was finalized quietly. No screaming courtroom battles, no vicious arguments over property, just signatures. The ending of one life, the beginning of another. Ryan eventually called one afternoon and apologized awkwardly for how blind he had been. Vanessa had moved back to Columbus after months of constant fighting between them. Without me buffering every conflict inside the family, all the cracks they ignored became impossible to avoid. I think I became selfish, Ryan admitted quietly. You became comfortable, I corrected gently. There's a difference. He cried a little after that, so did I. Not because I regretted leaving, but because sometimes love survives even after the life built around it falls apart. The following October, exactly 1 year after the promotion dinner, I sat on the porch wrapped in a soft cream-colored sweater with a cup of coffee warming my hands. The lake shimmered gold beneath autumn sunlight. Leaves drifted lazily across the yard. Somewhere down the road, Helen laughed loudly at something while gardening. I thought about the woman standing alone in that Ohio kitchen 1 year earlier, staring at leftovers labeled with her own name. She believed leaving would destroy her life. Instead, it returned it. If you're listening to my story right now and recognize pieces of yourself inside it, I hope you remember this: you are allowed to matter too. You are allowed to want peace, to want respect, to stop shrinking so other people can stay comfortable. And no matter how long you've spent disappearing for everyone else, it is never too late to come back to yourself. I'd love to know where you're watching from, and whether any part of this story felt familiar to you. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. We have many more heartfelt stories like this coming every single day, so subscribe and stay with us for the next journey. Until then, take care of yourself.